The blueprints arrived on a Wednesday, which should have told him something. Owen Garrett had learned, over 41 years of living and 12 years of working with his hands, that Wednesdays carried a particular kind of trouble. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that arrives folded into ordinary paper and doesn't announce itself until you're already holding it. He was under a Chevy pickup when the courier knocked on the frame of the open bay door. A kid, maybe 20, with the look of someone who had driven farther than he'd expected to get here. Millhaven wasn't on the way to anything. That was partly why Owen had chosen it. "Garrett Automotive," the kid said. "Sign on the door," Owen said, still under the truck. He rolled out on the creeper, wiped his hands, signed for the envelope. The kid was already backing out before Owen had finished reading the return address. Voss Meridian Group. One of those names that sounded like a law firm, but was actually a development corporation, the kind that bought things and built other things and occasionally destroyed something in between. He didn't open it right away. He slid it onto the corner of his workbench under a torque wrench and went back to the Chevy. His daughter found it that evening. Bea was 9, and she had her mother's instinct for locating anything that wasn't where it was supposed to be. She appeared in the doorway between the shop and the house at 6:15, still in her soccer cleats, the envelope held out in front of her like evidence. "This has a fancy logo on it," she said. "I know. Did you open it? Not yet?" She set it on the workbench next to his coffee mug, which was empty and had been for 2 hours, and climbed onto the stool she had claimed through years of consistent occupation. "You're doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing where something is a big deal and you're pretending it isn't, by working on something else." Owen looked at her. She was watching him with the same directness her mother had used, the one that never quite asked a question because it didn't need to. "Go wash up," he said. "I'll make dinner. I already washed up. I came to tell you dinner was ready." She paused. "I made the pasta." "From the box. How long did you boil it?" The box said 8 minutes. "I did 10 because you always say 8 is optimistic." He almost smiled. "Set the table. I'll be right in." She slid off the stool, paused at the door. "The logo has a crane on it, like the bird." "I know what a crane looks like, Bea. Just saying." She disappeared into the house. He opened the envelope after dinner, after the dishes, after Bea had gone to her room, and he could hear the particular low sound of her reading. She narrated to herself sometimes, just barely audible, a habit she'd had since she was 4 and 1 that he had never once considered correcting. The letter was from a company called Voss Meridian's legal department. It was 3 pages. The relevant part was on the first page, halfway down, written in the specific language that legal documents use when they want to deliver something uncomfortable with the greatest possible distance from the discomfort. It informed him that Voss Meridian Group, as successor entity to Caldwell Precision Engineering following the acquisition completed 18 months prior, was exercising its right under the asset transfer agreement to recover certain intellectual property that had been classified as non-transferable proprietary materials. Specifically, a set of 6 performance engine schematics, the Falconer Series internal designation F7, which had been categorized as failed development assets at the time of the acquisition and had been distributed to contractors as disposal documentation. Owen had been one of those contractors. He'd received the F7 schematics 3 years ago when Caldwell Precision, in the final chaos of its acquisition, had been distributing files with the haphazard generosity of a company that no longer believed in the value of what it was giving away. He'd known what they were. He'd been the one who designed them. He folded the letter and put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept the things that required thinking before responding. Then he went to check on Bea and found her asleep with the book open on her chest, which was standard. He marked her page, turned off her lamp, and stood in the doorway for a moment. She looked like her mother when she slept. Not painfully, not the way it used to look, just true. He went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about 6 engine schematics that someone had spent 18 months deciding they wanted back. In the morning, he called his old attorney, a man named Frank DeLuca, who had handled his separation from Caldwell Precision and who answered the phone with the economy of someone who charged by the hour even when he wasn't. "They can't take them back," Frank said after Owen had explained. The distribution was part of the asset transfer. Caldwell's legal team signed off on the disposal classification. Whatever Voss Meridian inherited, they inherited the terms. They say the schematics are non-transferable proprietary materials. They say a lot of things. What does your copy of the distribution agreement say? Owen pulled it from the filing cabinet in the corner of his office, a room so small it was technically a closet with pretensions, and read the relevant clause aloud. Frank was quiet for a moment. You're fine. They're posturing. But posturing from a company that size costs money to respond to even when you win. You want me to draft a reply? Not yet, Owen said. Let me think. He thought about it for 2 days. He thought about it while replacing the brake assembly on a Subaru belonging to a schoolteacher named Mrs. Aldrich, who had been bringing her car to him for 3 years, and who never failed to ask about Bea's grades, with the particular interested authority of a woman who had taught 6th grade for 30 years and considered every child's academic progress something of a personal concern. He thought about it while Bea did homework at the corner workbench he'd cleared for her, her pencil moving in the specific angular way she wrote, which was completely her own, and had resisted every penmanship suggestion her teachers had offered. He thought about it while lying awake on Thursday night, which was the night he tended to lie awake when something was pressing. The particular hour of 2 a.m., when all the things he'd been managing during the day stopped cooperating with the management. The Falconer engines had been the 3 years of his life that preceded everything falling apart. He'd been a senior development engineer at Caldwell Precision, which had been at that time one of the more serious independent performance engineering firms in the country. Not the largest, but the kind of place that did work worth doing because the people there believed in doing it correctly. The F7 project had been his from the beginning. His design philosophy, his materials choices, his insistence on a particular fuel delivery architecture that had taken 18 months to get right, and that he still believed, without the satisfaction of having proven it, was the most efficient approach to that specific problem that had been developed in the previous decade. The project had been terminated 14 months before Caldwell was acquired. The official reason was budget overrun and a series of test results that the executive team had characterized as inadequate. Owen had argued in the specific way that engineers argue when they believe the data is being misread, that the test results were adequate for the parameters the engines had actually been designed to meet, and that the parameters against which they'd been evaluated had been changed 6 weeks before the tests were conducted without engineering review. Nobody had listened, or nobody with the authority to act on the listening had listened, which produced the same outcome. He'd left the company 4 months before the acquisition. His wife, Laurel, had been in the 2nd year of her illness by then. The sequence of events was not something he put in order often. There was too much in it and too little distance from the parts that still carried weight. But the outline was company, illness, resignation, Laurel's death 8 months after he left, Millhaven, the garage. 3 years of building something small and reliable out of the wreckage of something large and complicated. The schematics had arrived by email during the acquisition chaos, part of a batch of files that Caldwell's IP team had flagged as non-commercial disposal materials. He'd downloaded them without particularly deciding to. They were his work. He hadn't thought of it as taking them. He'd thought of it as keeping a record of something he'd made. He hadn't looked at them in 2.5 years. They lived in a folder on his external drive labeled F7 Archive that he passed over every time he connected the drive to transfer photos of Bea or receipts for the shop's accounting software. He opened the folder on Thursday night at 2:15. He told himself he was just going to look. He looked until 4:30. Bea found him still at the desk when she came downstairs at 6:45. "You didn't sleep," she said. It wasn't a question. "I slept some." She looked at the screen, which showed a page of technical schematics that meant nothing to her visually, but that she recognized, in the way children recognize things without understanding them, as something her father cared about. Is that what came in the envelope? Related to it. She opened the refrigerator, looked at its contents with the evaluative calm she brought to most things. "We have eggs. Do you want eggs?" "I can make breakfast." "You can," she agreed, in a tone that communicated her assessment of the likelihood of this happening in his current state. "But I'm already up." She made scrambled eggs with the focused competence she'd developed over a year of deciding that being useful was better than being waited on. A decision she'd arrived at on her own, without input from Owen, who had noticed it only after it was already established. She brought 2 plates to the desk and sat in the spare chair he kept in the corner for the rare occasions when someone needed to look at something with him. Dad? Are those the engines you built? Before? He looked at her. She was eating eggs and looking at the screen with the same directness she brought to everything. How do you know about those? You talked about them. When I was little, when you and Mom were both still, she stopped, adjusted. When we were in the other house, you came home once really upset and Mom made you tell her what was wrong, and you talked about engines for like an hour. He didn't remember that specifically, but he believed it. Yeah, he said. Those are those. And the fancy Lego people want them back? They want the right to control them. The designs. B ate for a moment. Can they do that? Legally, probably not, but legally, probably not, and actually not are different things. She looked at him sideways, which was a habit she'd developed that he recognized as her mother's. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, he said. Eat your eggs. I am eating my eggs. She ate a forkful to demonstrate. For what it's worth, I think they're wrong. You don't know the details. I know you, she said simply, without drama, and went back to her eggs. He sat with that for a moment. Then he ate his eggs. The reply he sent to Voss Meridian's legal department was written by Frank, and was 3 sentences long and communicated, in the language of letters that cost money to write, that Owen Garrett considered his possession of the F7 documentation entirely consistent with the terms of the original asset distribution and had no intention of complying with the recovery request. 11 days later, he received a phone call. He was in the middle of a carburetor, rebuild on a '68 Mustang belonging to a retired firefighter named Al Stubbs, who had owned the car for 30 years and treated it with the specific reverence that certain men extend to machines they've kept running through decades of ordinary life. The call came from a number with a New York area code, and Owen almost didn't answer because New York area codes before 9 a.m. were rarely good news. Is this Owen Garrett? A woman's voice, professional, with the cadence of someone who had made this kind of call before and had learned to lead with her name before the other person could hang up. My name is Iris Voss. I'm the CEO of Voss Meridian Group. Owen set down the carburetor component he was holding, very carefully, because it was a small part and his shop floor was not forgiving. I know who you are, he said. Then you probably know I've read the letter your attorney sent. A pause that was measured rather than uncertain. I'm not calling about the letter. What are you calling about? I'd like to come see the work. He was quiet for a moment. The work, the F7 documentation you've retained. I've had my engineering team review what they have of the original files, and there are gaps I'm trying to understand. Gaps that I think you might be able to help with. The gap, Owen said carefully, is that your company classified a completed functional design as failed development assets so your predecessor could justify a budget write-down. The silence on the other end was longer this time. That's a direct characterization. It's an accurate one. Another pause. He could hear faintly the sound of a busy office behind her, phones and voices, and the specific ambient noise of a building with too many floors. Mr. Garrett, I became the CEO of Voss Meridian 14 months ago. I inherited a lot of decisions I didn't make. I'm trying to understand which ones were made badly and why. Owen leaned against the Mustang and looked at the carburetor on the workbench. Al Stubbs had driven that car home from the hospital the day his first son was born. He'd told Owen that with the particular preciseness of a man for whom certain facts about certain machines were inseparable from the facts of his own life. When were you thinking? Owen said. Friday. If that works. It works, he said. I'll be here. I'm always here. After he hung up, he stood in the shop for a moment with his hand on the Mustang's hood. Then he picked up the carburetor component and got back to work. He had 2 days and a design he hadn't opened in 2.5 years until 4 nights ago, and had now looked at every night since. He was already thinking about what he'd changed if he had the chance. She arrived at 10:15, which was 15 minutes late for a 10 o'clock meeting, and she arrived alone, which was the thing that surprised him most. He'd expected a team, an attorney, an assistant, someone to carry things and look watchful. Instead, it was just a woman in her late 30s who stepped out of a car that had clearly been driven from a long way and had the specific dishevelment of a vehicle that had been on a highway for more than 3 hours. She was taller than he'd expected from a phone voice. Dark hair, practical clothes, not what he'd have predicted for a corporate CEO, but there was something about the way she moved that suggested the tailored version was available and had been deliberately set aside for this particular trip. "Mr. Garrett," she said. "The sign," he said, nodding at it, which was the same thing he said to everyone. She looked at the sign, then at him, and something shifted in her expression that he recognized as recalibration. He'd seen it before. People drove to Millhaven expecting something more, or something different, or just something other than a two-bay garage on a county road with a hand-painted sign that was about 2 years overdue for repainting. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," she said. "You came a long way to tell me that." 3 hours and 40 minutes. There was traffic leaving the city. She looked at the garage with a directness that wasn't evaluative, or at least wasn't obviously so. "Can I see them? The documentation? You can see what I have." He took her inside. She moved through the shop carefully, not touching anything, which he noted. Some people came into a shop and immediately put their hands on things without asking. It was a particular kind of assumption. She didn't do that. She stopped at the workbench where he'd set up the external drive and a monitor the night before, having decided at some point that if she was coming, she was going to see what she came to see. He pulled up the files. The F7 archive, in full. 6 complete engine designs in various stages of documentation, plus the supplemental notes he'd kept separately, the handwritten calculations he'd transferred to scanned PDFs, the tolerancing files he'd maintained on his own backup system because he'd never fully trusted Caldwell's server redundancy. Iris Voss stood behind him and looked at the screen. She didn't say anything for a while. When she did, it was a question. "These are the complete files. These are what I have, which is everything that existed from my side of the development. Whether Caldwell maintained the rest in the acquisition transfer, I can't tell you." "They didn't," she said, with the flatness of someone stating a fact they've recently confirmed. What Voss inherited was approximately 40% of the original documentation. The rest was either not transferred or was classified in a way that made it unlocatable in the archive. He turned to look at her. "Unlocatable. That's the word the IT team used, intentionally unlocatable or just badly organized." She met his eyes. "That's one of the things I'm trying to determine." He pulled up the fuel delivery architecture file, the section he'd spent the longest on, the piece of the design that he still believed was the most technically significant, and the least understood by the people who had evaluated it. He explained it the way he always explained technical things, not talking down, not performing, just describing what the system was and how it worked, and why each element connected to the next. She listened. She asked 2 questions. Both were good questions, specific and accurate, the kind that come from someone who has done enough reading to know what they don't know. When he finished, she said, "The test results that were used to classify these as failures. Did you see them?" "I saw the summary interpretation. Not the raw data. I have the raw data." She set the bag she'd been carrying on the workbench, a leather bag worn at one corner, the kind that gets worn from being carried rather than from being old. She pulled out a folder. "This is why I came." The raw test data was 47 pages. Owen read it standing at the workbench while she stood to one side and didn't hurry him, which he noticed and appreciated in the way you appreciate something that costs someone something. He read it twice. The second time he read slower because he was looking for something specific, and he found it on page 31. "The evaluation parameters were changed," he said. "Yes, 6 weeks before the tests. The threshold requirements were increased beyond what the original design spec was targeting. Yes, who authorized the change?" She opened the folder to a specific page and pointed. He looked at the authorization signature. He didn't know the name, a mid-level engineering manager he'd never worked with directly. But the department above the signature was one he knew. "Alfred Crane," he said. It wasn't a question, but she answered it. Alfred Crane was Caldwell Precision's chief operating officer for 9 years. He negotiated the terms of the acquisition with Voss Meridian on Caldwell's behalf. Owen set down the folder and looked at the workbench. A socket wrench he'd left out the night before was sitting at an angle that bothered him, and he straightened it without thinking about it. Crane had a financial stake in the outcome of the acquisition, he said. It wasn't a question. "That's what I'm looking into," she said carefully. "What kind of financial stake? The kind that would have been more valuable if the Falconer program had failed than if it had succeeded." She paused. I don't have complete documentation of that yet. I have the shape of it. Owen looked at the test data on the workbench. 47 pages. The answer to a question he'd been carrying for 3 years, laid out on paper in a garage in a town he'd chosen because it was far from everything he was trying not to think about. "What do you want from me?" he said. "I want to understand what I inherited," she said. "And I want to know if what I inherited is worth more than what I was told it was." He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back without the professional composure becoming a performance. There was something genuine underneath it, something that had been working at something hard and was tired in the specific way of people who don't stop when they're tired. "Come back in 2 weeks," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Why 2 weeks?" "Because I have work to do," he said. "And so do you. And because I want to actually show you something when you come back, not just tell you about it." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, with the economy of someone who commits to things carefully and means them when she does. 2 weeks, she said. She was gone by noon. Owen stood in the empty shop and listened to her car get smaller on the county road, and then looked at the F7 archive still open on the monitor. He pulled up the design modifications he'd been running through in his head for 3 nights. The things he'd have done differently with time and distance. He opened a new file and started writing. 2 weeks became 12 days. He called her on the 12th day, which was a Thursday, and said he was ready. She arrived the following Monday with a man named Terrence Park, who was her head of technical acquisitions and who turned out to be exactly as useful as someone who asks good questions and gets out of the way of the answers. Owen walked them through the complete documentation over 4 hours. He explained the original design, the modifications he'd developed in the 12 days since her first visit, the specific technical case for why the F7 series was not a failed program, but an abandoned one, which were different things. Iris Voss took notes with the focused speed of someone who wrote faster than she could type. Terrence Park asked 3 questions. They were all the right questions. At the end of the 4 hours, Iris said, "If these designs perform at the level you're describing, what would it take to prove it?" "A test run, proper facility, independent evaluation. I can arrange a facility, not one connected to Voss." She didn't hesitate. "Independent. I'll find one." Owen looked at her. "You know this is going to complicate things for you internally. If the F7 designs are sound, it means the failure classification was fraudulent, and that leads somewhere you might not want to follow." "I'm already following it," she said. The composure held, but the exhaustion came through cleanly, the way it does in people who have been holding something difficult in place for a long time. "Crane is still on the board. He's been there since the acquisition. If this is what I think it is, everything I do in the next month is going to be contested. And I'd rather know what's true than not know." He looked at the F7 documentation on the table. The work of 3 years of his life, sitting in a garage in Millhaven, because someone had decided the truth of it was less useful than the lie. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything yet," she said. "That's why I need the test." B found out on a Wednesday. She came home from school to find her father standing in the shop, with his sleeves rolled up and a look on his face she hadn't seen in a long time. "You're working on something new," she said. "I'm working on something old." She set her bag down and came in, stopping at the edge of the light. The monitor was open. The F7 files were up annotated now, covered in his notes in the digital markup system he used when he was thinking through something seriously. "The engines." "Yeah." She looked at the screen for a moment. "Is the Crane Legal lady going to help?" "Her name is Iris Voss. And yes, maybe." B climbed onto her stool with the ease of long habit. "Do you trust her?" Owen was quiet for a moment, considering the question the way he considered her questions, with the actual weight they deserved. "I think she's doing the right thing," he said. "I think she found something she didn't expect to find, and she's following it anyway. That's its own kind of trustworthy." B looked at him. "Mom used to say that following something hard was different from following something easy, and both of them told you something about the person." He looked at her. The shop light was overhead and a little harsh, and she looked young in it in the way that caught him sometimes. "Yeah," he said. "She was right." B looked at the screen for another moment. "I think the engines are going to work," she said. "Not as a comfort, as a conclusion. You don't know enough about them to draw that conclusion." "I know you," she said again, the same way she'd said it before. Simply, without any performance around it. He turned back to the monitor. Go do your homework. I did it on the bus. Do it again. She sighed with the complete expression of someone who finds this an unreasonable suggestion, then pulled her backpack toward her and opened it. A moment later, her pencil was moving, and he was back to the files, and the shop was quiet around them in the particular way it got quiet in the evenings when both of them were working on separate things and didn't need to say so. The test facility was called Northeast Dynamics Testing, 60 miles north of Millhaven in an industrial park that had nothing on it to suggest a connection to any corporation Owen had worked for or heard of. Iris had been specific about that. He arrived at 7 in the morning with the consolidated documentation on a hard drive and a specific anxiety that he'd been managing for 10 days by not thinking about it directly. The kind that arrives when you've been carrying something for 3 years on faith and are about to find out if the faith was warranted. The lead technician was a woman named Kay Hobart, who had the unhurried authority of someone who had been running tests long enough to have stopped being impressed by the equipment and started being impressed only by the work. She read Owen's documentation the night before and asked 6 questions before they started. They were all technical. They were all exactly the right ones. Iris arrived at 8 with Terrence, who sat up in the corner with his laptop, as was apparently his professional habit, and they began. The test took 6 hours. Not because anything went wrong, because Kay Hobart did not cut corners on anything, and Owen did not ask her to. At 2:17 in the afternoon, Kay called him over to the monitoring station and showed him the data readout from the first full performance sequence. He looked at it for a long time. The numbers were what he'd calculated. Not approximately, not close. The fuel delivery architecture performed at the efficiency level he'd designed it to reach 3 years ago and had been told was unattainable. The thermal management held, the output curves matched his models, and the modifications he'd developed in the 12 days between Iris's visits, the adjustments he'd been turning over in his head for 3 years without the opportunity to implement, had pushed the performance 11% above the original projected specification. He straightened up from the monitor and stood very still for a moment. Iris had come to stand beside him without his noticing. They were both looking at the data. 11%, she said quietly. The intake geometry. I had time to think about it. She was quiet. The testing bay was quiet around them. Kay's team made small notations, communicated in the minimal way of professionals who understand what they've just witnessed. The failure classification was fraudulent, Owen said. Not to her specifically. Just a statement. A fact that had just moved from the category of things he knew privately to things that existed in the world. Yes, Iris said. They didn't say anything else for a moment. The data was still on the screen, 11% above specification, 3 years and a 12-day sprint and a 60-mile drive to an industrial park. What happens now? He said. Now, she said, I go back to New York and do something I've been building toward for 6 weeks. She paused. And I wanted you to know what I'm going to say before I say it. He looked at her. Tell me, she told him. Alfred Crane had structured a side arrangement during the acquisition negotiation, a consulting agreement with the exterior design firm that had won the contract the F7 program would have replaced if it had succeeded. The arrangement had not been disclosed to the Voss Meridian board. The value of it, over the 4 years it had run, was substantial. The termination of the F7 program, accomplished through the manufactured test parameters, had directly protected that arrangement. You have documentation, Owen said. I have documentation, financial records, the authorization chain on the test parameter modification, procurement records, email correspondence that was supposed to have been deleted in the archive transfer and wasn't. Is it enough? It's enough, she said. I've had outside counsel review it. It's enough for the board, for a formal investigation, and if the AG's office agrees to take it, for a criminal referral. Owen looked at the monitor, the numbers still there. Proof of something he'd known for 3 years without the means to demonstrate it. He's still on the board, Owen said. Not for long. She said it without drama, the way you say something when you've done the work to support the statement and don't need to perform around it. What do you need from me for the board meeting? He said. Permission to present the test results and to correct the official record. She paused. Your name was removed from the F7 development documentation in the acquisition transfer. Not misplaced, removed. Deliberately. The engineering credits were redistributed across team categories. Owen was very still. I suspected that. I'm confirming it. I'd like to correct it. He looked at the data on the screen for a moment. His design, his 3 years, his name apparently that someone had decided wasn't worth keeping attached to the work. Yes, he said. Correct it. She nodded once. They stood in the quiet of the testing bay while Kay Hobart's team continued their documentation with the methodical care of people who understood the work they were recording mattered. The board meeting happened on a Tuesday. Owen wasn't there. He was in Millhaven, under a Subaru belonging to Mrs. Aldrich, who had brought in what turned out to be a wheel-bearing issue she'd been ignoring for what the wear pattern suggested was 2 months longer than advisable. Iris called him at 4 in the afternoon. It's done, she said. Tell me, she told him. The vote on suspending Crane's board authority had been 9-2. The vote on correcting the F7 engineering credits had been unanimous. The outside counsel had already been in contact with the state AG's office. Owen put down the wrench. He stood in the shop for a moment. Your name is on the work, she said. Officially, as of today. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the oil-stained concrete floor and at the light coming through the bay doors at the particular afternoon angle that meant it was close to 4 and Bea would be home from school in half an hour. Thank you, he said. You did the work, she said. I just read the documents. He heard something in her voice that was different from the CEO cadence, more real, the register of a person who has done something hard and is on the other side of it. How are you? He said. She was quiet for a moment. I've been asking that question of other people for 6 weeks and trying not to think about what my own answer was. What is it? Tired, and something that might be relief if I slow down enough to feel it. Slow down, he said. It's allowed. Another pause. There's one more thing. Tell me. The F7 series. If the board approves, and they will, the vote was preliminary. Voss is restarting the program. With the updated documentation, your updates. He leaned against the Subaru. What does that mean for me? That depends on what you want it to mean. The technical advisory structure I'm proposing doesn't require you to relocate. Monthly review. Your assessment of the development process from here. When you're needed on site, we bring you there. When you're not, you're here. He looked around the shop. His shop, the one he'd built into something steady, and his own over 3 years of showing up to it. Bee's in school here. She has a life here. I know. This is designed around that. He was quiet for a moment. Let me think about it. Take the time you need, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He hung up and stood in the empty shop and thought about Alfred Crane in a boardroom 9-2 and his name on the F7 documentation, and Bea coming home in 25 minutes to find him standing here with a look she'd identify immediately as a look about something that mattered. He picked up his wrench. He finished the wheel bearing. He made dinner. Bea came home at 4:42, 2 minutes later than usual, a fact he registered automatically in the way that parents register the rhythms of children's movements. She dropped her bag inside the door, appeared in the shop entrance. You have a look, she said. I'm making dinner. You're making dinner and you have a look. She came inside, looked at him with the assessing directness she'd had since she could talk. What happened? The board voted today. About the engines. She went very still. And they got it right. Bea looked at him for a moment, with an expression that was serious in the way she was serious when something mattered to her, and she wasn't going to pretend it didn't. Then she said, Mom would have made you do something to celebrate. Probably. She would have said the engines working was a separate thing from you being right, and both of them deserved their own celebration. He looked at his daughter. The shop light overhead, her face open and certain. She would have been right, he said. Can we get the good pizza? Bea said. The place on Hester Street, not the one by the hardware store. The one on Hester Street is 45 minutes away. It's worth it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, go get your jacket. She went for her jacket with the contained brightness of someone who has exactly what she wanted and doesn't need to perform about it. Owen turned off the shop lights, one bay after the other, and stood for a moment in the near dark. The F7 engines were real. They'd always been real. What had been done to them had been careful and deliberate and sustained. And it had worked for 3 years. And now it hadn't. And his name was on the work where it had always belonged. He thought about Laurel, who would have had a specific thing to say about all of this, and who he thought about differently now. Not with the same compressed weight. but with the particular sharpness of someone very real, who was very absent, and who he missed in all the ordinary moments that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the fact that she would have been present in them. He thought about what 3 years of carrying something without the means to prove it felt like when the proof finally existed. He thought about Bia at the table in the pizza place 45 minutes away. Asking questions about engines with the serious curiosity she brought to anything she decided was worth understanding. He turned off the last light and went to find his keys. The engines were out there now, in the records where they belonged, in the work that was going to continue, and the man who built them was driving 45 minutes for good pizza with his daughter, which was not a small thing. It was, he understood, exactly the right size for this particular evening.